I oversee the unit PACT that does the supportive housing eligibility reviews. And so what I'm hoping today is that you come away with both an introduction and a review of the fundamentals of supportive housing as it relates to the eligibility review process. And I do want to thank the consortium, Tess, and the executive director, Bonnie Mohan, for inviting me to this, to conduct the presentation, the training, because it's great to get the word out on supportive housing. And this benefits both the participants, and it benefits the PACT unit, because the more people know about supportive housing, the better they're equipped to provide the services to their clients, so that if your client is eligible for supportive housing, you get that eligibility and then help them to get connected to the housing. So that's what I'm hoping you gain from this training. So you see this first slide, it says CAPS. That is the system that you use to submit a coordinated assessment survey and supportive housing application. And so I am the person overseeing the coordinated entry unit that helped to develop the CAPS system. So with that, I'm going to start with hold on. Here we go. So this is the agenda. So I'm going to give a quick review of the CAPS process. So if you're not familiar with our system, and when I say system, I mean the CAPS system itself that you interact with on your computer, but also systems that help homeless and at risk of homeless people to connect them with supportive housing. So I will be going over kind of broadly what that process looks like. And just a reminder of what Tess mentioned, you can enter some of your questions if you have in the chat. What we're going to do is get through the presentation, and then at the end have hopefully a robust question and answer period where we'll go through the chat, and also people will have the ability to ask questions. So we will go over the CAPS process, and then I'm going to let you know some of the new features in the CAPS system that I think will be helpful to you and your clients you're serving. Going over some of the, like I said, the fundamentals of supportive housing eligibility. I think that this will be helpful to you to understand how, a little bit of inside baseball of how the PACT unit determines eligibility, so that you have a good framework that you can operate from to help your client. Definitely sharing some tips with you on getting a successful completion of applications. Also, something that is fairly new to the system, although it's been part of the system for a couple of years now, the standardized vulnerability assessment. So we're going to let you know how the SVA, the standardized vulnerability assessment, works in our system, how your client gets determined as either high, medium, or low. And then some additional resources so that you can continue, if you're on a learning journey about supportive housing, we want to provide you with some good references that will help you to continue that learning process. Okay, so I'll go to, that's the agenda. All right, so this is what I promised, the CAPS process. This is what is basically the path that say a client, I always use the example of a client in, say, a DHS shelter, and our users, go through to, to determine, eligibility and what are the next steps. So you'll see the first tile, it is the user completes the coordinated assessment survey. That's in the CAPS system. If you have access to CAPS and you've done that survey, you understand that it takes about 30 minutes, and it's a series of questions that you answer for the client that you're serving. And what it does is it produces potential eligibility results for all the different categories of supportive housing offered in New York City, and also rental assistance programs. So you can see the first tile says user completes the coordinated assessment survey, and then there is a gray arrow going down that says potential eligibility for other housing options. So your client may be potentially eligible in the survey for supportive housing options and other rental assistance programs, and so you can see them listed there, or maybe just the rental assistance programs. So in the survey, it gives you instructions on kind of what to do, like what are the next steps and resources available to you if you received a potential eligibility result. We're not going to get too much into that survey system, but this is just a kind of an overview of the path I call it the happy path that your client will take if, like given the scenario that I'm outlining. So so you receive the potential eligibility results from the survey, and you receive a potential eligibility result for a supportive housing category. So what do you have to do next? You have to submit a New York City supportive housing application. A lot of people know this as the 2010 E. We do not call it that anymore, but you know what? I think it's kind of something that stuck with people. So that might be how you are familiar with our system. You might be like me, I remember when the 2010 E was the 1990, dating myself here, and it was a paper form, but now we have it in the computer. It's an electronic process, and you interact with the Pac Unit through the system, so that's great. You can interact in other ways, but through the system, it kind of gives you an update on where your supportive housing application is. So the HRA Pac Unit determines the actual eligibility. So you got the potential eligibility in the survey, and then you submit the application, and then it gets a determination of, say, we're talking about the happy path, right? So your client is approved and eligible for one of the supportive housing eligibilities or criteria or categories. And if you receive an eligibility determination, you will also receive the standardized vulnerability assessment. And so, as I said, I will go into that a little bit more later. And then, if your client is in the the DHS shelter system, as an example, there is a unit at HRA that also assists with referral and placement of the individual, and will help to connect your client to available supportive housing units in New York City. So that is what CAPS, a broad overview of what the CAPS process looks like. So I'm going to go on to the next topic. So I'm very excited about CAPS. We went through a redesign of the system. And about a year ago, actually a year ago exactly yesterday, was our anniversary of launching the redesigned system known as CAPS. And with that redesign, the system now requires a user to complete a coordinated assessment survey before they submit an application. So it's part of the workflow that you as a caseworker or someone helping a client to get an eligibility approval. You will need to submit the coordinated assessment survey prior. But it's great because the coordinated assessment survey has a lot of bells and whistles that will help you with the supportive housing application. That's why we made it required, so that a lot of clients match in our systems, and it returns a lot of information on the client. So there's a feature called client documents in the survey. There are prior surveys that it may return. So say you're a worker in a hospital, but a survey was done by another program within the last 6 months, you would see that survey completed on your client. And then also prior supportive housing applications are available to you. That is an exciting feature because before we had this enhancement to the system, that process of prior applications was opaque. So that's a way of saying that you would not know whether your client had a prior supportive housing application. So we return prior supportive housing applications submitted to Pac Unit within the last 5 years. So as you know, a lot of information is submitted in those applications. So it could be a great way for you to get to know your client and to submit a good, supportive housing application. You're not recreating the wheel. You actually have some resources available to you when there has been a prior application. So I think that that's a great feature in the system. Also, the system returns homeless data to you. So if you were not aware that your client was, say, in a DHS shelter or in the HASA system, the system would match with the CARE system, which is for DHS, and the HASA web system, which is for HASA, and return the days that they stayed in that system in the housing and homeless section of the survey. So that's a really wonderful thing. And then also the survey indicates, like right in the beginning, if you get a match on some prior supportive housing applications, the survey indicates to you whether there are homeless documents. So a lot of times we don't have a good kind of data match for our unsheltered clients, not yet. That should be coming, but so outreach programs are writing letters documenting the client's street homeless history. And so if you do get a match, you are going to, the survey indicates to you that there was a homeless doc uploaded to that application, and it actually prompts you to look at that document. And so that's a good thing because you may need it for documenting homeless time in the system, and we'll get into eligibility criteria later. Also, I'm going to show you later in this in the system, in the supportive housing application component of the system, you are able to upload. It's a very easy way that you can upload those homeless docs into the new application that you're creating. And so that's great because that gives us, a way of reviewing that documentation. Now, it's your choice whether to upload that document or not, but that's a great feature. And then lastly on this slide, there's an expanded list of professionals that complete a psychiatric evaluation. And so I'm going to go right to the next slide. to illustrate that. So these are all the professionals that can complete a psychiatric evaluation now. And I would like to really highlight that LCSWs and LMSWs with a cosign can complete a psychiatric evaluation. This is great policy, we think, because years and years ago, it was just licensed psychiatrists that could complete the psychiatric evaluation on the client. And so we are happy that now we have the, providers have the ability to enlist other professionals in your programs to complete psychiatric evaluations for the supportive housing application. So this is great. And sometimes this fact goes kind of unadvertised in our human services profession. Like a lot of people don't know this, and so they still are under the impression that it has to be a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but that is no longer true. So hopefully that also helps to get a complete application for your client. Next, this is just an overview of the Pac unit. So when I say Pac unit, that is the unit that determines the eligibility for supportive housing. And it stands for Placement, Assessment, and Client Tracking Unit. And essentially, it is licensed social workers, a team of them, that review your application for all categories of supportive housing. And so here is a list of all the different categories that the Pac unit reviews for. So there are programs in the community for the seriously mentally ill. These are contracted by Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the State Office of Mental Health. So that is a big category of supportive housing, many units dedicated to that. The New York 1 and 2 is an early agreement between New York City and New York State that focused on seriously mentally ill individuals that had homeless history. Then New York State and New York City came to an agreement in 2006, an expanded population. So there are populations A through I, we say. And so a lot of different populations that are being served. And the big thing about that expansion was, or the big deal about that expansion was we started serving families, which is a great thing for our community, because there are a lot of families with children and families in need of supportive housing. Then there's the Medicaid redesign team eligibility. The newest one is New York City 1515. I forgot to put on this slide, also we do eligibility for ESHI, which is the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative, and that's for the mental health and the substance use disorder categories, and then for DHS general population. Okay, so those are all so if you submit an application, we review for everything. That's the story. Okay, so so what is a comprehensive application? What are the requirements? So I'm going to go over this a little bit. So for the mental health categories of supportive housing, you will need a psychiatric evaluation. You will also need a separate assessment, a psychosocial assessment. If your client has homeless history of an unsheltered stay, like they were living on the street within the last 4 years, you will be wanting to obtain homeless documentation for the client on those episodes of unsheltered stays. And then for the Pop F category, you need to provide a substance abuse treatment letter. And so that is something just specifically for that category. I'm going to go over that a little bit more detail later in the presentation. Now, these assessments have to be current. And what I mean by that is they have to be completed no more than 6 months prior to the submission of the application. And so that means that if it's outdated, if it's older than 6 months, you're going to need to do a new assessment before you submit the application. Otherwise, we'll make it unable to complete in the unit, and then we'll ask for an updated assessment. And we always say that we remind people for Pop E and F, without mental health conditions, you don't need a psychiatric evaluation. A lot of people still don't know this, but this has been our policy for quite a while now. So I always like to mention it because there are new people to the system, and you should know that if you're just submitting for your client for one of the substance use categories, you only need a psychosocial.
Real quick, Craig, I have a question here.
Sure.
And tell me if you're going to get to it later. How would one obtain documentation of an unsheltered stay?
Yeah, so I'm going to get into some of the ways. Why don't we hold that till later?
Perfect.
But remind me, please. Okay. But yeah, I think we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, great. All right. So, I just went over what the complete application package looks like. And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit here, so to speak, and get into some of the specifics, like the criteria that the PAC unit uses to review for eligibility. And if you're not familiar with the State Office of Mental Health's definition of serious mental illness, then you should familiarize yourself. But I'm going to go over it right now. But I'm going to go over it very quickly. So this is on their website, so you can read the full definition, and we have links to it in our system. So basically, this is the clinical. It's a clinical definition of a person that not only has a serious mental health diagnosis, and that, you know, typically an example of that is major depression, major depressive disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia. These are some of the more familiar serious diagnosis that your client may have, and it needs to be that they have an actual diagnosis in the psychiatric evaluation. But they also must have, if they have SSI or SSDI due to mental illness, that is also something that is considered. So that is part of the criteria. Or if they don't have that, like, so Social Security determined that they had a serious mental illness, we take that into consideration because that's a very rigorous application process with the Social Security Administration. And then, or if they don't have that benefit, if they have extended impairments in functioning due to mental illness over the past 12 months, we then consider that. So what do I mean by that? That's like marked difficulties in self-care, in activities of daily living, in social functioning, and documented deficiencies in the ability to complete tasks in different settings like work, school, and home. So that is what we mean by extended impairment in functioning. Or perhaps your client has met the definition of serious mental illness we're outlining here, but it's been ameliorated by their treatment. And so they met it at one time, but they're in psychiatric treatment and they have supports, and they're doing much better, and they really don't have as extensive of impairment due to their mental health because of their treatment. So that's all the things that we consider in terms of the clinical criteria for the mental health supportive housing categories. So as an example, this is a specific supportive housing category. We'll review the New York 3 Population A. And what do we mean by that? So Population A consists of chronically homeless single adults who suffer from clinically a serious mental illness. And this also includes those that have a serious mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorder. So that's inclusive of that. They also have a chronic homeless history. And so you can document that they have been homeless, or maybe our system documents for you, if they've had shelter stays, 1 year out of the last 2 years, and 2 years out of the last 4. So this is just an example of both the clinical criteria for the supportive housing category of New York 3 Population A, and the homeless criteria. And so hopefully that's good. That kind of like helps to organize it for you to understand, what I'm talking about in terms of categories of supportive housing. And so that is a common category that people are approved for. I'd like to differentiate that category with some of the substance use disorder categories, like the New York 3 Population E. Now, Population E is homeless single adults with an active substance use disorder. So there's clinical criteria and homeless criteria to this category of supportive housing as well. So that if your client is using substances, currently has a substance use disorder diagnosis, and the homelessness criteria is that they have homelessness of 6 months within the past year, they will meet this supportive housing eligibility. So here's just kind of restating the clinical criteria for Population E. So they have the diagnosis of a substance use disorder. They have evidence of an active substance use. So, you're writing about it in the psychosocial that they have active substance use within the last 3 months. And they have impairments due to that substance use. And so you need to demonstrate that, and demonstrate that the substance use is the primary barrier to housing, and that it is exclusive of the SMI clinical criteria. So what I mean by that is that if we determine that there is no serious mental illness, that the client does not meet that criteria, then we go, that would be the primary barrier for how we determine eligibility. If they don't meet that, then we go to the substance. If there is a co-occurring disorder, we go to the substance use disorder clinical criteria and determine whether that is the primary barrier. And those are mutually exclusive. So you cannot be approved for Population E and a mental health substance use category, substance use supportive housing category. All right. Now, Population F, the New York 3 Population F, is a little bit different. It's still a substance use disorder category of supportive housing, but this is for single adults that have recently completed a course of treatment and are at risk of homelessness. So we get into that. So they have a clinical diagnosis. You're providing documentation that they've completed substance use treatment, and you're also submitting documentation that they have documented abstinence from substances, and that documentation is a SUD treatment letter, and that has to be dated within the last 30 days, indicating that they have completed program participation. So this is what I call the recently in recovery. So within the last year, they have been in recovery. This is not somebody who's been in recovery for like 5 years, right? This is for people who are recently in recovery and show that they would be in need of supportive housing. Okay, so I advanced the slide to the presentation to show also the New York City 1515 supportive housing category. And this was the newest city initiative. So the city has is dedicated to develop 15,000 units over 15 years. This is a wonderful thing for providers, because it's going to increase the number of supportive housing units in our community, and that means more programs to serve the real need of people in our community for supportive housing. All right, so with the 1515 supportive housing category, it is essentially a combination of the SMI and or the SUD category. So that's why I like to, kind of go through, what is, I went through what was the Population A category, which is for single adults with SMI and chronically homeless. And then I went into some of the substance use categories. 1515, we can think about it a little bit as a combination of those two categories, except that the client also has to meet the homeless criteria of the chronically homeless criteria that is the HUD definition. So the HUD is the U.S. Department of Housing Urban Development, and that definition is that you can document that your client is homeless for a year continuously, or that they've had 4 episodes of homelessness over the past 3 years that add up to a year of homeless history. So I like to highlight this because it's kind of our thinking has, evolved on people and their clinical issues. And I think that 1515 category is a good example of how, supportive housing is evolving and meeting the needs of individuals better. Okay, so these are the tips. So if you're submitting an application, we like to highlight to providers that are using the CAP system that you want to really review your assessments and that you're submitting, your documentation that you're submitting with the application. So there is the application itself. You're submitting a lot of information in the system, your data entering in the CAP system, but then you're also uploading your psychosocial and your psych eval. Make sure what you're entering in the supportive housing application is consistent with your assessments. So you would want to make sure that there is an alignment there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to, for some of the major things, make sure that it aligns so that, like if you're writing about, in the activity of daily living, if you're saying that you're your client needs support in activities of daily living, write about that in your psychosocial. It's important, and it will help to have that kind of like cohesive application that hangs together for the review process. All right, and then the next bullet on this slide is housing history should be completed for the last 4 years. Now, our system actually has a grid. I'm going to show you it later. And so you have to complete the last 4 years. The reason for that is that, you know, for the New York 3 categories, we have to know what your client's housing history has been for the last 4 years to determine if they're eligible for the supportive housing categories. And then clearly detail functional impairments experienced by the client as a result of their mental illness and substance use disorder. So a lot of people feel like just because you have a diagnosis of like, say, bipolar, now, they sometimes fail to write about how does that mental health category or that mental health diagnosis impact their client. So what are the functional impact on the client's day-to-day, right? So you're telling a story about how their mental health diagnosis is impacting them. And so that is very important. That's one of the most important things to substantiate the diagnosis. And so that helps to support that your client indeed has a serious mental illness. Because remember, I talked about those marked difficulties, those marked functional impairments. That's part of the SMI criteria. So please, you know, detail that in your psychosocial or if the or in the psychiatric evaluation. That is something that the PAC reviewers look for when they're reviewing your application. And then, so this also the clinical documentation, like the diagnosis is substantiated in your documentation. So you're writing about, you know, there is criteria in the DSM related to the specific diagnosis for your client. And so we are looking for that as well. And then I also like to say, just in terms of process, an unable to complete is not a disapproval. Unable to complete means that we are looking for you to submit additional information. We have questions, right? And so you have 30 days to resubmit. There's a function in the system that you don't have to enter all that data that you enter into the application. The resubmit within 30 days, we like you to do it as soon as possible because then it keeps everyone's memory fresh on what they're doing. But you do have 30 days in the system. Otherwise, you won't have that ability to kind of copy over the application and then upload your documents again to resubmit to the PAC unit. So I do like to highlight that because I think that that is an important point. All right, so this is more tips for all of you to you know, help you get a completed application. So this is communications with the PAC unit or the PAC reviewer. On the determination letter, you will see who reviewed your application and how to get a hold of them. And we always say, read the determination letter. There are always comments in the determination letter if you do not get an approval. So say that you get an unable to complete, there are comments in that. Sometimes people call us and they haven't even read the determination letter, and they are a little bit confounded by, you know, why did my client get an unable to complete? I did such a good job on the application. Well, we do unable to complete, you know, to get more information. And so in the determination letter, there will be comments to let you know, kind of heads up, not in detail, but to give you a heads up of what we're looking for. And I gave the example earlier of, like, say you submitted an outdated psychosocial. It was older than 6 months. We would want you to update it and submit it again. We need that to for our own policy. And then another tip is that if you feel like, you know, say you receive an unable to complete, and you know, you're like, well, I have an assessment from another like another provider. I can't do anything about that. Well, we can't either. And so what we often do is say, you know, seek supervision around how can you obtain better documentation to complete the application if it's not satisfactory. And then finally, if you and the reviewer are in communication either through email or you call the reviewer who reviewed your case, and you just really can't come to some kind of agreement, or that you have outstanding questions about the review process, you can request a supervisory review, and we do that not very often because the majority of cases, we do over 20,000 cases every year, 20,000 applications every year. The majority of those cases get resolved with the reviewer. There's a very good, you know, kind of dynamic between the reviewer and who's submitting the application. But sometimes you need a third party to come in, and you can request a supervisory review in those cases. Okay, so I'm gonna go transition from eligibility to what is in our system, the standardized vulnerability assessment. Now, if you are eligible for supportive housing category, you will also get a report in the system that is the standardized vulnerability assessment, and this is the criteria for that. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but you're gonna just suffice it to say that we look at Medicaid expenditures, but we also look at system contacts and functional impairments. And so you can see here what the criteria is for high, medium, and low in those categories. And I'll speak more to it in the next slides. Okay, so how does the SVA work? So the SVA does a data match and pulls information from 3 data systems. It pulls from our own system, the CAPS system. It pulls from another HRA system called STARS, or Substance Treatment and Referral System, and that's for substance use clients. And then we also have a match in the Medicaid Data Warehouse, or MDW. And it pulls a lot of information on hospitalizations and substance use treatment and medical. And so that's where we get our data on Medicaid expenditures for individuals that match in the system. All right, this is really important. So I would like you to, you know, have a sip of coffee. I'm going to take a little sip of my tea here before I get into this, because this is very important. This is the relationship between what you enter in our application and how that translates into your what is the vulnerability of your client, the SVA. And so in the application, there's a section for the activities of daily living. And so first thing, I already mentioned this, but for the activities of daily living, if you're gonna note that somebody needs a lot of assistance or has functional impairments in one of those areas in the ADL section, that you also have that explained in your assessments. So that's important. But technically, what you enter in that ADL section also makes an impact on how your client ultimately gets determined how vulnerable they are. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit more. So you can see this is an actual screenshot. I don't know if people can see this very well. I hope you can. But this is an actual screenshot. So you can see in the first column, it shows of our system, of the ADL section in the CAP system. And so say under the activity of personal hygiene, you would be selecting from the type of support, either direct assistance, mostly independent, or some support. And so then you would document in the application what you mean by, like, say, the person needs some support or direct assistance. And so that is where we get the functional impairment in the SVA criteria. So if you select that your client has one functional impairment, then that would be in kind of the low category. If you selected 3 or more, that would mean that somebody is in the high vulnerability category. So this is just another screenshot of the activity of daily living section, and it gives examples of what I was talking about. I used the example of personal hygiene before, but the direct assistance of travel and mobility is illustrated here. Also, you may have a very independent client, which is fine, and that's great for your client. And so the SVA is a prioritization mechanism for referral. And so even if your client is low on the SVA, does not mean that they are not eligible for housing. You know, they are still eligible for housing, but in certain systems, we may you know, we may refer somebody who is of a higher SVA, and that's why we always say it's so important to be accurate in the in this section of our application, so that your client has the appropriate vulnerability category. So this is just reiterating that we have kind of 2 ways of also so that's functional impairments, and then the other criteria is system contacts. And so if your client has been in one system that is in the low category, and if your client has been in multiple systems, that you know, raises the person's vulnerability according to the criteria. And so you can see here, it's also important to complete the housing and homeless history section appropriately. And so if you're noting that the client was in, say, a jail setting, you would want to note that in the housing and homeless section, in order to for them to have that as a system contact for calculation of the standardized vulnerability assessment. We also pull data from the, if you're referring from a shelter, you have a kind of like a shelter type in our system. And so we know that you're referring from a shelter, and so we count that person in the homeless system. So that's an automatic count. Doesn't have anything to do with what you document in the homeless section, housing and homeless section. So this is, I promised to show you a screenshot. This is our new housing and homeless history section in the application. And you can see here that it's a grid. And what you do is you complete all of the missing information on the client. So our system may populate some of these sections for you. Say if they had a shelter stay, and it will show in blue that the person had a shelter stay. We will complete the section for the 2010 E things that are pulled from there. And also, then also when there's missing information, you'll see it in red. That's information that you'll need to complete on your client because the system did not pick up from all of our data matches. And then you can see, you can expand the housing episodes to see exactly what the system is picking up and how their homeless housing history was completed either, by the system or by yourself. This is the other feature I wanted to highlight to you because I think it's really great. If you have a client has unsheltered homeless history, you can see that this is the part where in the system where it gives you the ability to upload documents from prior supportive housing applications over the past 5 years. And so you will see that you can click on what looks like a little magnifying icon and view that document to see if you want to include it in your application. And then if you do want to include it, you can click the arrow icon under the actions to attach it to the application you're creating and you want to submit. So this is a wonderful feature in the system, and I hope people take advantage of it. All right, we're nearing the end here. This is just some technical specifications I like to review with people. So if you're in the system, make sure you're actively in the system or it will log you out. So any 10 minutes of inactivity, our system will log you out. That's for performance in the systems. What we say in systems is that we want to optimize performance of the system so that it acts quickly for people. This is one of the features that we do. And then it has a maximum session. So one session, you can go for 60 minutes in the system. That's about enough time to complete the supportive housing application if you have everything that you need. Now you can always save the application and it's in your pending applications queue. So people who are familiar with the system know that. And then we have some support emails there for if you need support. And then if you want to learn more about the CAPS system, go to the link there that is illustrated. It is a wonderful, wonderful website. It has so many resources. If I used an acronym that you didn't understand, we have a glossary that is so comprehensive in that you're really going to like it if you're new to the field and maybe some of the terms are unfamiliar to you. And then this is just a list of these are the go-to. You just definitely want to have these in your resources, your reference materials before you start a supportive housing application. And so those can be found in our system under the training and announcement sections or at the CAPS link that's part of the New York City Continuum of Care website. So you can go to that link and pull down a lot of these reference documents as well. All right, that concludes our presentation. And now we can do some question and answers.
Great, thank you so much for that, Craig.
Yeah.
It's extremely helpful. So yes, everyone, please feel free to throw in any questions you might have into the chat. We received a few during the training, Craig, so I'll just get started on those.
Sure.
So someone asked, can LMSWs complete the comprehensive mental health report if an LCSW cosigns? And what are the expectations of the cosigner?
So in the document, there should be the LCSW, there's a requirement for their license number. This is a great question, by the way, because I think there's a lot of LMSWs who would probably like to do the psychiatric evaluation, but you're going to need a cosign So you don't know what that means, right? So you will need to have an LCSW co-sign on the document, so on the actual paper document that you upload, unless you data enter the document in our system. And so they would sign the assessment after you. It would have their license number, which we also ask for in the application itself when you upload the document. So you're going to have to provide their licensure information. So that, that gets checked by the reviewers. And so you'll need your license information and also your cosign license information in the system. But I'm hoping people will start taking advantage of, social workers who have this credential to complete psychiatric evaluation. It just really increases the number of people who can do this assessment for our clients.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And can the same person write the psychiatric eval and the psychosocial?
Yes.
Great.
And I just want to say, some people are like, well, why do you do that? Why do you make us do a psychosocial when there's a psych eval? Because, oftentimes the psych eval is a different focus. Okay, so these are different assessments. The psychosocial really is much more broad assessment of your client. It's the biopsychosocial model. And so you want to be looking at your client as a whole. A lot of times psych evals just look at it very kind of like, almost like a medical lens, and they're substantiating the diagnosis. They may not know the client as well because they're not seeing the client as often. Whereas like a psychosocial, it can be a caseworker. You don't have to be a social worker. You can be a caseworker who has, very good mental health knowledge, and you're going to create that assessment. And what I always like to say is, tell a story about your client. What was their history? How was their upbringing? What impacted, where they are now? Like how did they come to be where they are now, and why do they need the help that they need? And so, just generally, kind of broadening that lens beyond like the medical and the mental health to really know about the client and how their issues are impacting them on a day-to-day basis. If you do that, you're going to have a complete application, and we'll know better whether your client is eligible or not, right? So I just want to encourage people to do that.
Thank you. And then bouncing off of that, someone's wondering who can complete the psychosocial. Can it be anyone, or are there requirements?
There are no requirements, but you should know your client, right? So it should be somebody working with the client. And so, yeah, so that is, let me just, I got something popping up here. So yeah, so whoever is working with them. And so I used to do this when I was a caseworker before I had, I'm a licensed clinical social worker now, but I started out in the field as a case manager in a supportive housing program, and I used to write psychosocial assessments, and I think they were very good. So I encourage other people to do them and get good at that skill. It's a great skill to have.
Okay. And then looping back on the question I asked earlier, in case they're still looking for an answer, how does one obtain documentation for an unsheltered stay?
Yeah. So, if your client was engaged with a street homeless outreach program, which there are many of those in New York City, you can contact that program and ask if they have record of the client, and they can write you a letter of their interactions with the client while they were engaged with that person on the street. So that's the best answer I have for that. And sometimes they will know your client, sometimes they won't. And I know this can be a little frustrating because so depending on the level of engagement of people on the street, they may not even have shared their name or anything with the street outreach program. That's not any fault of anyone, right? It's just a fact.
Right.
But oftentimes they will know the client. They may have been engaged with them over a significant period of time, and they will write you a letter.
Great. I think someone is wondering how long after completing CAPS does it take to receive an answer?
Great question. So I'm gonna brag a little here. So the Pac Unit is very efficient, and I do take some pride in that. I was the director of the unit for several years before moving into being the assistant deputy commissioner. And they're a great team of people, very experienced social workers. It usually takes them under 3 business days for
Wow.
you to get an answer on your application. And I don't know any government unit that is like that. So, and it really speaks to our efficiency of our system, so we also have a whole system dedicated to their review process to help them do that for you. And I also like to say to providers and users of our system that we are looking to complete the application. We're trying to get to that eligibility. And so if we're asking for more information, we're not trying to be difficult or challenging or anything like that. We're just trying to complete the application and have a good package, housing package, for when that goes to the supportive housing providers ultimately, right? That's the goal.
Right.
And so they're going to be looking for information. And so we are the centralized review process, which is great that New York City has this. Not many localities have this. In fact, I don't know of many localities at all that have this. So New York City is kind of ahead of the curve on this, and it's a great resource. So that was kind of a long way of saying under 3 days. So you should get, and you get an automated email, to your work email that you have gotten a determination. And so it doesn't list what the determination is, but you have to go back into the system, and then you'll see the determination in the system. And then you know whether your client has an approval, which is great, or whether you may need to provide additional information to the unit and resubmit.
Okay, and that relates to another question someone asked.
Sure.
After completing CAPS, would we know what the individual qualifies for?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'm so excited about this. I'm giving you and your the consortium participants a heads up, a little preview that we just finished a training video on our determination letter. So that's going to go into the system at the end of November. So we're constantly looking for ways to educate people on the system and how to understand our process and that kind of thing. So I did give the tip that please read your determination letter. That really lets you know. I was using it in the context of when you get an unable to complete, but also review it for when you get an approval, because then you know exactly what your client was approved for. And if you were expecting to get, like, say, New York 3 Pop A, and you didn't get that approval, that is you need to then also figure that out with the PAC reviewer. So that's a good thing that you will stay tuned, because in the system you will see a whole explanation of what the determination letter, all the different components of that, and how to read it, basically. But a lot of people have figured it out over, in their experience, in their work history, or work experience, figured out what the determination letter means. So that's the first step.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
Everyone should be on the lookout for that.
Yeah.
And we got a couple questions going back to the question about obtaining documentation for an unsheltered stay. Someone wanted to confirm that you would have to contact the street homeless outreach teams.
Yes. Yeah. It'd be the only way that unless you find it in our system under a prior supportive housing application. I spent some time on that in this training. Right. So if you don't have, that available to you, it didn't match, your client didn't match in our system, and you didn't have prior supportive housing applications to review homeless documentation, might be there. If you don't, then you do have to, it's kind of incumbent on you as the person working with the client to obtain that documentation. So this is based on the client reporting to you. So the client said, look, I spent this amount of time on the street. You can ask them, were they ever engaged with a program? And that starts the process of like reaching out to that program and obtaining the letter. Now, I will also say that you won't have to do anything if the client has had a stay in the shelter system or in the safe havens, because that's part of the CARES system. Providers that provide shelter services and safe havens settings are in the CARES system, and we have a data match in that system. And so that will pre-populate for you. So it's really just for those who are unsheltered, or on the street.
Okay, great. So hopefully that answered a question about, someone asked if a client had no engagement with one of the outreach workers, what other documentation can be provided. But if that person has any follow-up questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, or Craig, if you have anything else to add to that.
Well, I always say include it in the psychosocial, but we will be looking for like actual documentation, like a verification letter of the street homeless. I mean, you can always write about it, what the client is reporting to you in the psychosocial, but we might not count it because we have a policy where we need a verification letter, and that is because down the road, when the client is then being considered for supportive housing, they will need documentation of that homeless time, like the other funding sources that fund supportive housing. So like I said, we're not trying to be difficult. We just want to have the package ready so that there's no roadblocks for the client downstream, as I say, in the process of referring and placing them in supportive housing.
So someone said that they received an email from the COC saying that all CAPS users need to log in to verify their emails. Does this apply to all users who are just using the system to complete housing applications?
Yeah, I kind of went back and forth, like, should I mention this during the training? But the city is doing multi-factor authentication. And what does that mean? That means that, how like when you go, you log into your bank using an app, and, sometimes you have a verification process of like, they text you a number and then you have to enter the number, like that kind of thing. The city is doing that to increase security for all of our systems. And so CAPS is one of the systems within the city, and we are moving to that method of security, authenticating who is actually trying to access the information in our system, log on, right? Log in. And so I encourage everyone here, if you're a CAPS user, log in today. Log in, verify your email, because you're going to be getting instructions on how to do multi-factor authentication. And so we're trying to get the word out to everyone. And I'm glad that somebody read something on the COC website or got an email about it, so that people are questioning. But log in, that's the short answer, is log in as soon as possible, because you won't get that email unless you're like an active user of our system.
All right, everyone's task, log in today.
Log in today.
Okay, and someone's asking how they can get access to, actually completing the survey. Maybe you can send the link or instructions.
Well, all they have to do is, if you're not a user, what I like to say is that you may have somebody at your agency who is what is called a system administrator in our system. So first of all, find out if there's somebody else in your agency that has access to the system. And then if they're a system administrator, they can set you up as a new user. So we have a lot of functionality in the system that you can self-manage in the system, right? The agencies can self-manage. And so if you're, say you work for Canva. Canva is a very large organization. A wonderful supportive housing provider, but they provide a lot of different services as well. And so if you are a Canva, if you're employed by Canva, there are probably 30, 40 system administrators under Canva that could help to set you up as a new user. But if you don't know, go to the HRA CAS support email and request to be added as a new user of the CAPS system.
Great. And that email will go out in my follow-up email to this event, so everyone will.
Yeah, it's in one of the slides, the support email as well. But yeah, if you want to like highlight it, that'd be great.
Great. So Craig, I have a couple questions that are like very client specific to real clients. So if you're not able to answer them, completely understand. This person has a client who's interested in a TAP housing program. And she wants to know if you or anyone here is familiar with this program.
Yeah, I think, so this is where we get into acronyms. And so some agencies called treatment apartment programs TAP. But I know them as the OMH model apartment treatment. And that is a licensed program under the State Office of Mental Health that provides very structured services to mental health clients in the community in a scattered site setting. So I think that might be what the person is asking about. And so if you get eligibility for an SMI category, a supportive housing category, what I would say is that there are a lot of TAP programs or apartment treatment programs in the CUCS vacancy update report, and you could submit an application directly to providers like, say, Geel, or whoever has apartment treatment model, directly to that supportive housing provider. All the intake people are listed on the CUCS vacancy update report. So I hope that's a good resource for this person.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
In this one, someone here is trying to help their client who is street homeless, but she does not want to go into shelter, and she's having a hard time proving that she's homeless. Do you have any tips for her?
It is so I'll kind of play out the scenario. This may not actually relate to this particular case, but I'll just play out a scenario. As a worker, if I'm working with a client that is on the street, the first thing I want to do is, like she said, or he said, like to, sheltered homelessness is so much better than unsheltered homelessness for individuals. And so that is the main objective. But I would also want to get them connected with a street outreach team and be able to get them the additional supports. That these contracts in the city, this is what they do. They are experts in essentially persuading people to either go into a safe haven setting or a shelter setting rather than the street. It's such a terrible setting for people. It has a terrible effects on their health. And so that is the main objective for that client. So I would hope that they were able to connect the client not only to themselves, but also engage them with the street outreach services. And then that will also begin the process of documenting their street homeless time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so someone's wondering if they're, this person was a little bit late, so they may have missed it, but they're wondering if there's any information regarding SMI criteria, and is major depressive disorder / PTSD an eligible SMI for the 2010E application?
Yes. And so the resource is the State Office of Mental Health has a website. We have links throughout like a bunch of our different documents in our supportive housing criteria and descriptions guide. There's a link to that criteria. In the survey, there's a link, like it says, is your client seriously have a serious mental illness? And then there's a link to like kind of a layman's definition of the SMI criteria. But if they want to go to the exact criteria, they can go to the State Office of Mental Health website and get it there. So I do want to say, major depressive disorder is a serious mental health diagnosis, but that alone does not make your client seriously mentally ill. The last statistic I saw on this is from SAMHSA, the federal agency SAMHSA. They said that, only about 1 in 5 adults that have a mental health diagnosis like that, like major depressive disorder or bipolar or schizophrenia, only about 1 in 5 actually are seriously mentally ill. So that kind of gives you you know what I mean? So that illustrates that it's the other things that I mentioned that show that your client meets the definition of a serious mental illness. And it's really the functional impairments. So if you're very good at documenting that, then you're going to be a great advocate for your client in that way. So I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Craig. I just launched a quick poll if you all can fill that out. And I'm also going to drop a link to a short evaluation survey. We are always looking to hear about what issues you are interested in hearing more on. The consortium is here as a resource. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat, and please fill it out because it helps us with our work and it helps us help you and your clients. Okay, another question.
Sure.
Just want to clarify that the application in CAPS, including the psychosocial form, needs to be completed for the client. Correct.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Sure. You want to take a look in the chat? Maybe I am. Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah.
It's one of the.
Just want to clarify that the application is in your CAP, including the psychosocial form that needs to be completed.
Oh, okay. I got it. Yeah, I just saw the chat. Thank you. Yeah. So there is not. There is a psychosocial data entry form in our system. But a lot of people decide to write it, like say in a Word document, and then upload it to our system. You know, so if you receive a psychosocial assessment from, say, like an outpatient therapist, you can upload that into the system. You can also data enter your own like psychosocial, or write it and then upload it. So there's a couple options there. And I didn't mention, but there is a mental health report also in the system that is a very structured data entry form that is a combination of the psychiatric evaluation and psychosocial. So what you do is you attest in the system, I have a psych eval, I have a psychosocial, you enter the information on those, but then you're actually writing it, you know, data entering in the system according to the mental health report form, you know, all of the different areas of your client's life that we want to know about. And so there is a great guide that CUCS, that agency CUCS puts out, that speaks to the mental health report. It's not often used by people because there is a lot of data entry, and so it's faster, and we understand it's faster to upload an assessment if you have it handy. But that's also a good tool to use if you're kind of getting the psych eval and you're doing the psychosocial. Maybe you want to just go right to the mental health report and then just say, you know, I do have a psych eval. This is the diagnosis. This is the elements of that are in there, and then you write the form itself in the system. It's a lot of data entry, but it may be worth it in the long run in terms of completing the application for your client better.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think we finished our questions, so last chance everyone to just drop any questions you have into the chat. And once again, please fill out that survey, the short survey that I sent in the chat, super helpful to us. Give it a few more seconds.
Yeah, well, people may be entering questions. I just want to thank everyone for your time this morning. It was great providing the information. I hope it was helpful, and you have the presentation, you have all the reference materials, and I wish you luck in what you're doing. And I always say that it's great. You're working, a lot of people working directly with clients. I just want to commend you on a job well done, and that you're interested in, you know, serving your clients the best you can. So thank you so much. And I want to also thank Tess and the consortium again for, you know, giving me this opportunity to share the information.
Great. Well, yes, thank you, Craig. This was extremely informative, and we really appreciate everything you shared and taking time to answer questions. I'll follow up with everyone here shortly so that everyone has the information. And if you have any other questions that come up, please feel free to email me and I'll make sure to find you the answer. So with that, thanks everyone and have a great day.
Have a great one, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.